When you live in a place like Wisconsin, and you're stuck inside with snow blowing outside in sub-zero temperatures, there's really only a few motorcycle things you can do, like work on your machine and watch YouTube videos. Or if you're Peter Egan, you spend the winter writing about the flat expanses, curvy mountain roads, and scenic coastlines that he's traveled all over the world on all kinds of motorcycles. Peter's writing taps into the psyche of a motorcyclist. He gets behind the why of riding a motorcycle and combines it with classic Midwestern humor and honesty. In fact, the story that got Peter a job at Cycle World magazine for over 4 decades was the debacle of his Norton Commando breaking down on a road trip out west and leaving him and his wife Barb having to take the bus back home. Although, as you'll hear, he did finish the trip. Reading Peter Egan's collections of articles in Leanings 1, 2, and 3 showed me everywhere you could go with a motorcycle. Not just around town, but around the world. And he's a big reason that Driven to Ride even exists in the first place. This is Peter Egan, I'm your host Mark Long, and you're listening to Driven to Ride. Peter Egan, you're on Driven to Ride. Thank you for inviting us up here to the legendary workshop.
Nice to have you here. I cleaned up the workshop because I knew you were coming. It looks better than usual, so
yeah.
It's as good as it gets. So.
Yeah, you've got a couple of nice machines in here. You're sitting behind a 91 Miata. What do you got, a Royal Enfield behind you?
Yeah, it's a Royal Enfield Himalayan. I've got about 11,000 miles on that. It's a perfect bike for these small, gravel-strewn roads on the back roads around here. It's comfortable for all-day riding, and it's fast. It'll go about 78 miles an hour flat out.
Yeah.
And it'll maintain 70 on the highway if I have to, but it's happy at lower speed.
Yeah, well, thankfully you've got all the county roads around here that you can take advantage of.
Yeah, we've got good roads here. It's the hill country in Wisconsin. And
a lot of people don't know that Wisconsin has such great roads. I mean, you've lived in California and you've lived in Wisconsin, probably two of the best places you can ride, right?
Yeah, we had a group of friends from Northern California who came out. It's a group we ride with every year, and it was our turn to put on a ride. And they all thought they were going to arrive in totally flat territory with cornfields and nothing else to look at. So how can we ride in Wisconsin? We just go down a straight road. And but the whole southwestern part of Wisconsin, actually all the way up past the Twin Cities, was unglaciated, and so it's almost like the Ozarks or something. It's very hilly and a lot of small farms, and it's pretty country. That's where I grew up. So
yeah. So let's kind of start, I guess, at the beginning. Maybe not when you were a child, but. What do people kind of know you for? What's your claim to fame?
Well, my friends know me for my margarita recipe. 3, 2, 1.
That's a good start. Yeah.
But I would say if I run into somebody who recognizes my name, they probably almost certainly either read Road and Track or Cycle World magazine because I worked for both magazines for 40 years.
Okay.
And I had a regular column in both magazines. So eventually, if you get those magazines, you'll probably notice. And so almost everybody I run into who has any interest, you're Peter Egan, is somebody who reads those two magazines, one or the other.
Yeah.
Not everybody reads both. A lot of people are pretty much exclusive motorcycle or car people.
Oh, really?
And they don't know about the other job.
Interesting. Yeah, because I grew up around cars and motorcycles.
Yeah, me too.
So there was no distinction. I didn't know kind of in the real world there was that much of a distinction.
Yeah, me either. It's all one thing for me. So
yeah, if it's got a motor, because I believe you've been involved in boats and planes too, right?
Yeah. In fact, I just finished writing a book. My wife Barbara and I took a flight around the United States in 1987 in a Piper Cub.
Wow.
We took 6 weeks off. We accumulated at vacation time, and we were living in California at the time, but we had a 1945 Piper Cub, and we flew to visit my dad in Florida, and then up the East Coast, then back here and back to California. So airplanes and cars and bikes have always been kind of a interlocking fascination for me since I was pretty young. It's funny because my parents were not interested at all.
Oh, really?
Nobody in my family ever rode a motorcycle or wanted one. Or my dad liked nice-looking cars, but
Sure.
he didn't. He was very mechanically inclined. We had a family printing office, and newspaper, and he could repair all the machinery in the office, but he didn't do any work on cars.
Really?
I mean, he always had somebody check his oil at a gas station because he didn't want to mess with it. And,
yeah. Well, back in the day, it was full service.
Yeah, that's right. You didn't have to. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I guess, where you got your mechanical interest from then.
Yeah, I guess so. My parents didn't want me to have a motorcycle at all when I was in school, and I had to talk them into it very carefully and ease them into it by I convinced them that a Bridgestone 50 was just a little scooter, a little motorbike. And,
right.
They got used to that, and I got through a whole year with that without crashing. And so when I got a Honda Super 90, they almost didn't notice the difference. And then it was a Honda CB 160.
Right. It just kind of went built up from there.
Got my foot in the door.
Yeah. So if you didn't have kind of the family exposure to motorcycles, how did you get into motorcycling?
I don't know. Something kicked in when I was about 12 years old. I started paying a lot of attention to cars, racing cars. And I stopped in the drugstore one day, and they had just gotten in 2 new magazines, Road and Track and Sports Car Graphic.
Okay.
And I picked up Sports Car Graphic or Road and Track, I can't remember, and opened it up, and there was a picture of Phil Hill driving in the Grand Prix de Monaco. And I just looked at those beautiful Formula One cars, very good-looking cars in that era, clean, and I said, look where they're racing, and through the streets of Monaco.
Right.
And so I bought both magazines and read them cover to cover.
Wow.
But then I was interested in cars, so I was always hitchhiking to junkyards to look at old cars because I was thinking what kind of car I could restore or fix up and own.
Okay, yeah.
Or what I could make into a stock car. I always wanted to race, a car.
Yeah.
And one day I was hitchhiking, and 2 guys on Harleys went by. They had big FLH with the two-tone windshield and so on, and leather saddlebags. And one of them stopped, and the other guy slowed down, looked back, and said, "What are you doing?" He says, "This kid needs a ride." He says, "Hop on, kid." So I got on the back of this buddy seat, and I looked over his shoulder. We were going to a junkyard. I was going to a junkyard in New Lisbon, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And I looked over his shoulder, and he was going 80 miles an hour at one point. And I thought, this is the best thing I've ever done. And if these guys were going to Alaska, I would just stay on the bike, and I'd call my parents from Fairbanks or something.
Right.
So they were riding to a Harley dealership in New Lisbon, Wisconsin. Okay. And so I got off with them and went in the Harley dealership and looked around. And of course, I couldn't afford a Harley, or I was only 14 at the time. And but they had a Harley Hummer, which was a small, I think a 125 2-stroke.
Okay.
That somebody had junked, and they had it thrown on top of their junk pile. And I thought I could buy that and fix it up. So I went home and told my parents I wanted to get this motorbike. And my mother said, "As I live and breathe, you will never own a motorcycle." My dad agreed with her.
Wow.
And I thought, well, they're just wrong. Of course I'll own a motorcycle. they just have no idea how important it is. And at the same time, probably the same month, I had just seen Lawrence of Arabia, the movie.
Yeah.
Peter O'Toole. And it opens with him getting on his Brough Superior. Mm-hmm. And he takes off for a ride. And of course, he crashes and gets killed, but that didn't matter. It shows a very romantic idea of going down the road and the wind blowing.
Yeah.
And that was the first, I think when I saw that movie, I thought, I've got to get one of those, motorcycle. That looks like a good time. And so it was a combination of things. Mm-hmm. Everything kind of fit together in the early 60s for people my age. The Japanese were coming out with affordable bikes that didn't break down. The movies, Steve McQueen appeared in the movies riding Triumphs. There's all this good publicity for motorcycles. And everybody I went to school with at some point in high school wanted to own a motorcycle or tried to own one. And, they maybe took a test ride and didn't like it, or they fell down, or they were, it didn't work for them.
But there was some kind of interest in it somewhere.
But they were interested. Everybody tried, almost everybody did at that time. And I just got hooked on it. I don't know if something just clicked in when combination of movies and riding on a bike. And,
right place, right time, I guess. Yeah.
The romance of travel, the whole thing.
Yeah. No, I remember, so when I was a kid, my dad would put me on the back of his bike, whatever it was at the time or whatever. And I just remember I can't wait to do this on my own, and do that. And then once I did, that was it. I was kind of hooked. So totally understand. It's like those one kind of moments that turn your life in a different direction.
Yeah.
So, well, and then, so we can kind of skip ahead a little bit. You rode through high school and into college and had a couple of cool bikes then, I remember. I've read.
Yeah, I had actually when I went to college, I bought a CB 160 at the end of my freshman year in college. And my roommate and good friend, Pat Donnelly, and I took a trip through Canada.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In the fall, right before we went back to school for my second year. We went to Montreal and back.
Okay.
Pretty cool rainy autumn weather. It was a fairly cold trip.
Yeah.
And we were too cool to bring rain gear. We didn't think that would look good. So
No.
it was raining on us, and we were wearing leather jackets, and it's chilly, and we were really soaked and cold, but we still had a good adventure going to Montreal.
How long was that trip?
I think it was about 1,600 miles. We came back across central Ontario. We actually ran into a guy who was riding a Harley. He'd just gotten out of the Air Force, and he had a Harley Sportster. And he was riding, he was going to do the four corners of the United States.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
He had a mound of camping equipment, unlike anything I've ever seen, on the back of his Harley. And he stopped and camped with us at this park for the night. And he had a huge Sears, like a family-sized tent.
Really?
Kind you could put a picnic table in.
Yeah.
And, he parked his motorcycle inside. He had a 2-burner Coleman stove. And all just this massive mound of stuff on the back of his Harley.
Good for him, man. That's great.
Yeah.
So you really are no stranger to riding long distances all the time. You've kind of made your career with that.
Yeah, I like doing travel stories, and I would try to think up a reason to go somewhere that I wanted to see anyway. And a lot of the stories that I did for Cycle World and Road and Track have a musical connection.
Okay.
I've always liked guitar and blues and rock and roll and folk music. I like a lot of different kinds of music.
Sure.
And I played guitar. So I would suggest a trip that somehow involved, like one of them was going to the Mississippi Delta.
Yeah.
And then I did a road and track trip where I restored an old Cadillac and took Hank Williams' last trip across, and he died in the backseat of his Cadillac in 1953. In Oak Hill, Virginia, and I went from his home in Montgomery, Alabama, to Virginia, and followed the route that he took on his last drive. So I like those connections with some other story other than what I'm doing. It's,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think now that you're talking about it, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but the stories that you write and that you have written aren't necessarily about you. You're the main character, but it's not. It's more about the travel and the adventure and the story in and of itself. So
I want to see what's out there.
Yeah. And I think what really hooked me into your writing is that you rode down to New Orleans for coffee.
Yeah.
For chicory coffee, I think is what it was.
Yeah, that's right. It was, what did I call that story? It was the French Quarter Connection.
There we go.
Was the name of that story. Yeah, I always wanted to go through the Mississippi Delta because I'm such a blues fan.
Right,
I'd read a lot of biographies of these great bluesmen and how they were recorded and so on. And I also wanted to see New Orleans. And so I had a 400F Honda that I'd bought that I was planning to race that summer.
Okay.
But I had all the racing parts for it. But before I did that, I wanted to take a trip with it and get it more broken in.
Yeah.
And so I left Madison, Wisconsin, and went down the Mississippi. First, I went up to Brainerd, Minnesota. So I followed the source of the Mississippi is Itasca, Lake Itasca in Minnesota. So I followed the river all the way down and went to New Orleans. But I spent, the main focus was to go to the Delta.
Yeah.
I also stopped in near St. Louis in Wentzville. Is Chuck Berry's home.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I had read a bit about Chuck Berry, and so I had to go out and see Chuck Berry's place.
Yeah.
And he just happened to be in town that weekend.
Oh, really?
And I went out and I found his house. It's Berry Park. And I walked up the driveway. The gates were open. I parked my bike on the road and walked up, and a older blonde woman came out and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I had heard that Chuck Berry has concerts on the weekend, like free concerts."
Oh,
and
really?
It's
okay.
like my mini Woodstock deal here. And she said, "Oh, we don't do that anymore. That got out of hand." And so I bet it did.
Yeah,
but
a little bit.
She said, "But he is playing tonight at the Rainbow Club in St. Louis."
Okay.
And she gave me the address, and so I went in and found a cheap motel nearby and went to the Rainbow Club, and Chuck Berry played from about 8 o'clock till 2 in the morning.
Wow.
And And then in between sets, he would come out and sit on the hood of his car and talk to people, and we'd all hang around. Yeah.
So really low key guy.
Yeah, he had a hood of somebody's car. He had a little camper, and he would go and change, put into a clean shirt that wasn't all sweaty, and hot. Yeah.
So that's kind of spoiled the surprise a little bit, but you kind of made a career writing, wrote for Psycho World, and it's a long trip that got you into Psycho World, right?
I worked for 10 years as a foreign car mechanic in Madison.
Mm-hmm.
I majored in journalism in college.
Yeah.
And the middle of my junior year, I decided I should become a doctor for some reason.
Okay.
And so I switched my major to pre-med.
Wow.
And I lasted about 6 weeks with that. I took a 5-credit physics course. I was trying to catch up on a 5-credit biochem course.
Yeah.
And I realized I was going to get miserable grades in both courses.
Yeah.
And I'd never get into a medical school anywhere. And so I got up out of a chemistry class lab and walked down State Street in Madison and joined the Army.
Oh, okay.
And my parents were not pleased with that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up in Vietnam for 14 months. So
wow.
I was sent to infantry school and then went to Vietnam.
Wow.
And when I got back, I finished college.
Okay.
And I had 3 semesters left. I went back into journalism. But when I got out of journalism school, it was a bad time for magazine and print journalism. A lot of newspapers had folded.
Okay.
And so even when I would try to get a job with a small town newspaper, like Reedsburg, Wisconsin or something, I would go and the guy would look at my tiny resume that I had, and he would open a file drawer and say, "See this file? We've got 6 people who used to work on the Chicago Sun who would like to live in Reedsburg." And
wow.
They've all got 10 or 12 years of journalism experience. What have you got for us? And I'd say, well, I can't compete with that.
I got a can-do attitude.
Yeah, so I couldn't find a writing job anywhere. So one of my main interests was working on cars anyway.
Yeah.
I loved, and I wanted to race a sports car.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a job at a foreign car shop, and everybody at the shop raced. They were all sports car people.
Gotcha.
And so I bought an Austin Healey Sprite H production car, and I built that and started racing it. But after about 10 years of that, I decided I should really try to use my journalism degree, get back into it. And I was writing the whole time. I wrote 2 novels that I couldn't get published.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sort of feeling down from that. I couldn't seem to get anything published, even in the newspaper.
Yeah.
And my friend Howard Sprengel, who was a Honda mechanic in Madison, said, why don't you write about something you're interested in, like motorcycles?
Right.
And I said, yeah, okay. Write a story for a motorcycle magazine. And I said, I don't know if they would accept if they're looking for freelance travel stories from somebody in Wisconsin.
Right.
And he said, Phil Schilling, who's the editor at Cycle Magazine, lived in Madison and had a job with a textbook company and went to Daytona one year and wrote a color story for Cycle Magazine and submitted it, and they liked it, and they hired him.
Wow.
And I said, okay, I didn't think it was possible to do that.
Right.
I thought you had to live in California and know somebody. And so I said, well, I'm going to cook up a trip, and maybe I'll write something about it. And Barb and I just bought a new Norton, and Barb and I were already planning to take that on a trip to the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to go up to Seattle first and also stop in Idaho to see her sister and brother-in-law. And they lived in Moscow, Idaho. So we were on our way to Moscow, Idaho with the Norton Commando, brand new. And it broke down in Missoula. There were no parts. It had a stuck valve, and the piston hit the valve and bent the valve. And,
oof, yeah.
So we couldn't get parts or the tools to even get the head off. I couldn't get the correct wrenches. So we just pushed the motorcycle over to a Beacon's moving van company from our motel and shipped it back to Wisconsin. And we took the rest of the trip by bus and train. Man. We went to the West Coast we got a train ride part of the way and took a bus all the way back to Wisconsin from Seattle.
So you actually made it to the West Coast?
Yeah, we did. But not with a motorcycle.
Okay. So you didn't turn around immediately and just say, forget it.
No. So I thought, well, there goes our, I was hoping to do a motorcycle story, but I guess there's a story here that, I had this Norton and everybody warned me that it was not a good idea.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
all kinds of people at motorcycle shops.
So what are you doing?
We had the Norton shop was also a BMW shop. And one of the mechanics I knew came out and he said, so you're going to take a Norton Commando to the West Coast with Barb? And I said, yeah, I'm hoping to. And I said, what do you think I ought to do to get it ready for the trip? And he said, I would adjust your chain and oil it, change your oil, adjust your valves, and then trade it in on a BMW. And I said, oh, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
For the, yeah.
But it was the Norton I bought was really a Monday morning or a Friday afternoon bike. It had a lot of problems. It was, I think about 6 major things went wrong with it the first couple of months I owned it. The clutch went out, the side stand broke off.
And it was brand new.
Yeah, it was brand new. The valves got stuck. It blew oil if you went over 70 miles an hour and you had the oil filled to the proper level. It blew it all over the rear tire.
Jeez. Safe.
And I later talked to Brian Slark, who became a good friend of mine. He's really a Norton guru and a former British motocross champion.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he was a service manager for Norton at the time. And he said, we corrected all those things and we sent out bulletins, that they should be covered under warranty, like the clutch problem.
Yeah.
And so on. And he said, we used iron valve guides briefly, tried them out, and they would seize because the expansion rate was wrong with the valves. We went back to bronze. But he said they should have known that and fixed it for you. But they wouldn't. Every time I took it in, they said it was abuse, and I had to fix it myself or pay for it.
Man.
So I got pretty tired of fixing the Norton after a while.
Yeah. So, I was going to ask, so after that bike broke down, you still soldiered on through the trip, but, were you you weren't over motorcycling or long distance trips?
No. I just took it as these things happen and you just do, you have a moment of disappointment when something breaks and then you say, well, it's reality. Here we are. What do we do now?
Yeah.
So I just went on with the trip and fixed the bike when I got home and had it for another year or so. But I finally, I guess what caused me to get rid of it was I wanted to go racing. And, and so I sold it to help buy the 400F Honda that I wanted to race in 400 box stock.
Gotcha.
Production.
So then that story that you wrote from that misadventure, I guess we'll call it, that's what got you landed into Cycle World, right?
Yeah. I went home and I wrote a story about it. And I worked on it the whole summer. It was, I'd read it over and over again. And I thought, I'm going to keep working on this till even I like it, that I can't stop, and
there's nothing I would change.
Oddly enough. And I said, I'm just going to work on this so they can't reject it. And so I kept reworking it. And finally I sent it in, and I sent it into Rider magazine at the time, or I guess maybe it was Road Rider at the time. It was a different title, different staff and everything, and waited to see if they wanted it. And I got a letter back saying, kind of, the story reads okay, but unless you've got really spectacular photos, we wouldn't be interested. And I just had a few snapshots from the trip.
Yeah.
I had worked as a photographer, but I didn't shoot the trip, and so I was really disappointed, and I just threw the story in a drawer. And my friend Lee Hagelin said, well, aren't there any other motorcycle magazines? And I said, well, Cycle and Cycle World are the two big ones. And I said, they very seldom publish a touring story, especially a freelance touring story.
Yeah.
He says, well, send it to them. It's sitting in a drawer.
What's
Why not?
The worst? Yeah. What's the worst
thing that can happen? You'll get, your 20th rejection slip. And so I sent it to them, and lo and behold, Alan Girdler liked it, and the people, Tony Swan was there at the time. He liked it and recommended it, and the secretary who worked there at the time liked it. Alan later told me that she came in and threw it on his desk, and she said, if we don't buy this, I quit, or something like that. So all of a sudden, somebody liked it,
Yeah, that's awesome.
And Alan Girdler wrote, he's the editor I worked for when I went to work at Cycle World.
Okay.
He wrote that the reason he published that story was he actually took the time to read it, which a lot of editors don't. They just say, oh, I don't have time. But anyway, he published that, and he said, if you've got anything else, send it to us. So over the next few years, I sent in 4 more, like the 400F story about going to New Orleans. I did one called Snow Place for a Motorcycle, about getting stuck in a snowstorm and on a Norton ride. A couple more feature stories, and then I finally hit them up for a job. You know,
Okay.
I said, if you ever have a position open, I would be interested in moving to California.
Yeah.
And Alan Girdler sent me back a letter, and he said, darn, he said, if we'd known you were looking for a job, we would have hired you, but we just hired a man from England, John Nutting.
Oh, okay.
And we paid $10,000 to ship his household goods over here.
And what year was this?
This was 1979.
So that's a lot of money.
78, yeah.
10 grand's a lot of money now.
Yeah.
And
But luckily, John Nutting arrived from England with his fiance, and she didn't like California. She didn't like L.A.
really?
And she went back to London and said, I'm going back to London, and if you want to marry me, you come back to England. And
Wow.
so he quit after a month.
That's
and
insane.
all of a sudden, Alan Girdler called me one day and asked if I wanted to work at Cycle World.
It's probably a dream come true, really.
Oh, yeah. At that point, I was working as a service manager in a Volkswagen repair shop, and I'd had a really long day. I had to work from about 5 o'clock in the morning till last car left at 7:30, and I came home with a splitting headache because we'd had some bad customers, and I still had my work boots on and my work shirt, and I got home and Barb said, "Oh, I made your favorite enchiladas." And I said, "I got to take to Excedrin and lie down upstairs for a little while. I've got a bad headache." And it was snowing out and the wind was blowing, and I was just lying there listening to the wind blow, and the phone rang, and it was Alan Girdler. And he says, "Peter Egan?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "How would you like to work for Cycle World in California?" I said,
Man.
"That's me knocking on your door. I'll be right there." And,
I love it.
So, yeah. Actually, I asked, that's a Raymond Chandler line. I said, when he said that, "Would you like to come here and work for Cycle World?" I said,
Yeah.
"Do you read Raymond Chandler?" And he said, "Yes, I do." I said, "That's me knocking on your door." It's an old detective line.
I'll be right there.
Yeah. And so I had to fly out for a job interview, and they wanted me to start right away.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and because they really needed more staff. And so, it's about 3 days before Christmas when I was out there interviewing, and Alan said, "I suppose you have to go home first before you can start work." And I said, "Well, it is going to be Christmas Eve, and I hate to leave
Probably
Barb
important.
home."
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, yeah, that's right." Well, he said, "Can you start January 1st or 2nd?"
Yeah.
He said, "Why don't you go home and then jump in your car and come out here and start working the next day?"
Yeah.
And so I did.
Man.
Barb had to sell her house, and
She did all the
she had to
heavy lifting while
she did.
you were gone. Well, it takes a supportive spouse to go on trips with you, I imagine, and then to support you through your career.
Oh, yeah. She's a physical therapist.
Okay.
And so, she made, better income than I did all through the 70s. I was first an apprentice mechanic, and I was starting to make some money as a mechanic. But she had that was her major in college, and she had a real, job that followed her schooling.
Yeah. Kind of medical-ish. You can kind of get a job almost anywhere. So,
yeah.
So then we're at Cycle World. I mean, then that's probably, they send you all over the place, don't they?
Yeah. And I was hired as a technical editor, so I had to answer a lot of technical mail and spent a lot of time on the phone calling up, Honda to see people planning to rejet. There's a lot of rejetting requests at that time because they were all the bikes were trying to meet emission controls and regulations. And so people would say, "I'm trying to rejet my Suzuki 400 or whatever,
Okay, yeah.
So there's a lot of that. But I got back into doing travel stories too. I went to Elkhart Lake for the first AMA races at Elkhart Lake.
Okay.
And rode a Suzuki GS 1000 out there with Barb and back. And on the way back, I did a Route 66 travel story, followed old Route 66 to see what was still there.
Was that the one where it's like there was some left of it, but some not?
Yeah, it was very divided up. And it still hadn't caught on as a nostalgic thing at that point for travel. So there were a lot of closed motels and, these old space age looking motels with a sign and closed because the interstate had gone through and bypassed them. And so there's a lot of leftover culture along the old road.
Yeah.
And,
do you have another story like that? The one in Missoula, did you ever have like a breakdown story again where like just a kind of a killed the trip?
No, I never
that was the
did.
only one?
I thought about that. And I can't remember any trip, either with a car or a motorcycle. It was a complete breakdown where I couldn't fix it, whatever it was that day, and get back on the road. But that was the only one where I just couldn't come up with the parts or the tools I needed.
So it was just a British bike.
Yeah. Not a lot of Norton dealers in Montana.
Yeah,
But,
no,
at
I
that
can't
point,
imagine so. Well, and that's back in the day when it was kind of like everything was specialty. There wasn't,
Yeah.
you couldn't take a bike to anybody and say, let's take a look at this. I mean, there's still some of that, I think, now, but there's so many different shops everywhere that you could probably find something, or thanks to the internet,
Yeah. It's hard to repair a bent valve and replace pistons and all of that when you're staying in a motel.
Yeah, that's serious stuff. So what, if you can pick one of your standout, I know you've been all over the world, all over the country, covering stuff, for Cycle World or for Road and Track and just for fun. What's kind of maybe the standout trip for you that they kind of sent you on, or maybe that they sold you on to go take?
I think my favorite one that was, I volunteered for it, but it was also an assignment, was to go to the Isle of Man. I've always wanted to go to the Isle of Man, and Barb and I went in 1982 to do a story for Cycle World. And we flew into London. We landed in Gatwick, and Suzuki UK helped us out. They had a guy named Ray Battersby was one of their PR people, and he arranged for us to get the loan of a Suzuki GS 650G, the shaft drive 650, which was a perfect size bike for England, back roads, and the Isle of Man, and for two people. Ray lived not too far from Gatwick Airport, and we went back to his place and picked the bike up. And we stayed overnight at a hotel, and then we rode to Liverpool the next day and got there in the evening. And we had to get on the steamer that went to the Isle of Man from Liverpool, which is filled with 300 motorcycles or something just packed in.
Sure, and, like sardines. Yeah.
But we got off at probably 10 or 11 o'clock at night in Douglas on the Isle of Man, and we had made a reservation of an old hotel. It was right on the main street there. So we rode to the hotel, and that was a wonderful place. It's fun to watch the racing. The Isle of Man itself is like a little microcosm of England. It has rocky fishing villages and sheep ranches and mountains and forests and small, beautiful villages with old stone buildings.
Yeah,
it's a lovely, beautiful place. And it was fun because the crowd that was there was pretty serious, because you have to really want to go to the Isle of Man, because you have to get on a boat and make reservations, and so it was a great crowd of people, a lot of nice motorcycles, and we stayed in a hotel right on the waterfront in Douglas. And during the week, we watched practice and qualifying, and between sessions they open the track up for traffic, and so you can stop at a pub or a churchyard on a good corner and watch one practice session, and then they open the road for an hour, and you can go to hop on your motorcycle and go to a different spot and watch it.
Wow, that's super cool. Yeah.
By the time the TT took place, we had been all the way around the track several times and found nice spots to watch from.
Yeah.
I still think that was the greatest road race in the world, and still is. It's dangerous, certainly, but at the time we were there, Ron Haslam won, and I think Mick Grant was leading and had mechanical trouble. And Joey Dunlop, he was leading he had handling problems and finished third, I think, and he was a many-time winner. And so we got to see all these guys I'd been reading about.
Yeah, in the flesh, and then you get to ride the road too a little bit to go from place to place. It's the same road.
Yeah. And then they open it up. They have on Sunday they open the mountain part of the track to one-way traffic.
Wow.
And you can go as fast as you want. And it's Mad Sunday, they call it.
Yeah.
And so you've got about 20 miles of the circuit. It's a 43-mile circuit. I can't remember the exact distance, but it's a long, three laps,
to a race. Yeah.
But we got out on that. It was quite crazy to watch, because you've got people in the Velocet club who are going 65 or 70, and then you've got people on brand new Japanese sport bikes who are going by at 160, and you've got all these overlapping waves of different speeds, and
mass chaos.
You got to really watch your mirrors on Mad Sunday, but it was fun. So.
Yeah, that sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So kind of going back to my other question about kind of misadventures or whatever. Have you ever taken a trip, whether for fun or for an assignment or anything, where you're like, oh my God, I should not have taken a motorcycle on this trip?
No, I haven't.
Really? Because you've been caught in snowstorms, you've been caught in rain, probably more times than you can count.
You realize that you shouldn't have, being caught in a snowstorm is not good. I would say there are times when I'm glad I didn't take a motorcycle. And I went to Daytona one year for Speed Week.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine wanted to ride down there because we had an unusual warm spell of winter here. And, it was 50 degrees for about a week. And I thought, yeah, we could get out of here in one day and ride all the way to Daytona. And then I went down there we decided to take my van and put 2 bikes in the van. I went down with my friend Bruce Finlayson. And on the way back, the weather turned and there were blizzards all the way through Illinois, the whole length of Illinois and Wisconsin.
Right.
And, we're seeing we're seeing motorcycles parked half buried in snow at motels. And so, and I was glad not to have done that trip. But generally, once I get on a trip, I just put up with whatever happens and deal with it. So.
That's part of the adventure.
Yeah, I guess, it is. Yeah.
So let's talk about kind of your stories a little bit. What inspires you to write a story? I mean, where do you kind of get the inspiration from?
Deadlines.
It's a good one, yeah.
When I worked for both magazines, especially when I worked for both of them at the same time, Road and Track and Cycle World, I had 2 columns due every month.
Okay.
And usually always one feature story for Road and Track because I was there full time later on. Mm-hmm. But I did some for Cycle World as well. So I always had at least 3 deadlines in a month. And it's never out of your mind. And so you're always thinking, if you see something, you're out for a ride with friends and you notice something that's or you think is interesting, you make a note of it. This might be column material because this is a typical thing that happens, whatever it is.
You kind of just, your brain's wired that way almost.
Yeah,
to find things,
knowing that that's coming. I mean, now that I'm retired, I just go riding and I can't remember what I did. It's just had a good time. But when you've got this obligation, you're always thinking, okay, Monday I have to sit down at a typewriter or a computer keyboard. Start out with a typewriter.
Yeah,
and you've got to get it done. So it's just part of your job. You're always thinking about what you got to do next.
Yeah.
And, but I always liked it. I never minded. I like writing, and my friend Howard Sprengel said, write about something you're interested in.
Yeah.
And my two of my favorite things, sports cars and motorcycles. So it's, my mind is working on those anyway.
You're always thinking about them. Yeah. So. Do you have a favorite trip that maybe it's recent or just that kind of lives rent free in your mind that you planned yourself that had nothing to do with Cycle World or nothing to do with writing, just a trip that maybe you always wanted to take or one that you look back on like very fondly?
I haven't taken many long trips where I haven't done something for the magazine. Mm-hmm. In recent years, since I've retired, I've made a couple of motorcycle trips out to Colorado to visit friends. And Barb and I have flown to California. We've got some old friends who live up in the Napa Valley area.
Okay.
Who have a group of people they ride with, and we've done several trips with them. We did one in Mexico. I also did a trip in Copper Canyon, an off-road trip that was a really good, interesting trip. So yeah, I've taken some. It's kind of a relief sometimes to think I'm just on this trip and I'm not going to write about it, so I can relax.
Yeah.
I don't have to stop and take a picture.
Yeah.
When you're doing a story, you think, I better stop and take a picture of that strange building. Or
you're kind of mission oriented. You can just kind of enjoy the ride, I guess. Yeah. Do you still write at all? I mean, maybe for fun or just every once in a while? Or
well, I've just spent the last year and a half about working on a book about the Piper Cub trip.
Okay, yeah.
And I've just finished it. And now the hard part comes, which is finding a publisher. So,
sure.
I'm getting a little lazy because I'm so glad to be done with it that I haven't really pursued an agent and
you just got to take some
publisher.
time.
Yeah.
Well, and it's been a nice summer too, so I'm sure you've done a little bit of riding. So
it's a long winter here, and so in the summer, if you feel like taking a ride, you tend to do it and take advantage of it. So I'm doing a lot of riding.
Well, yeah, you've done a fair amount of off-roading stuff. I know that you've got quite a few stories about going to Baja and just kind of, or knowing people maybe with farms or some land that have done a lot of dirt bike riding.
Yeah.
Do you like dirt bike riding more than on-road? Is it kind of the same to you? Or maybe what's so special about dirt dirt riding that you can't get on the street?
I like dirt riding, but I started pretty late doing that. I mean, I never rode a dirt bike till I was in my 20s.
Oh, wow.
In Wisconsin, we lived in a small town, but the roads are all paved,
right?
Because of the dairy industry. They're in pretty good shape. So there are really very few dirt or gravel roads. And you have to be pretty dedicated as a dirt rider, be going to do scrambles or motocross to get much off-road time. And when we moved to California, of course, it was a lot easier because everybody went riding in the desert.
Okay, yeah.
In fact, when I went to Cycle World, taking the new guy for a killer ride in the desert was a sort of a rite of initiation. And so I went with Ron Grivey and a couple of his friends who were hardcore desert racers, and they were all friends of Steve McQueen and Malcolm Smith and so on. So I went riding with them, and they, of course, they took me just on impossible climbs and descents of buttes, and I survived somehow and got home. But so I got a lot of experience in a hurry riding with Ron Grivey at Cycle World.
That's a trial by fire.
But I like riding on the road better, but I've always enjoyed. I did the Baja 1000 trail once. From right down to the end of Baja, and followed that trail and had a wonderful trip, and didn't crash. Made it all the way 1,000 miles without crashing somehow. But I was riding with some guys who were guiding. They had a tour group called Go Baja Ridin', and they had Honda 400s, XL 400s. Or XR 400s. And those were pretty good bikes for that trip. They were real hardy and not too heavy. And all of the guides on that trip were pre-running for the Baja 1000, which was about 2 weeks later.
Okay.
And so they were moving pretty well. And I remember following one of the guides out of Ensenada. And after about an hour, I was just completely beat, from trying to keep up with him on these dirt roads. And I thought, and I looked at my map and I said, well, only 975 miles to go.
Jeez. Yeah, you're in it now, though.
But it got better, and I got used to it. So, but there's so many people who I know who are much better dirt riders than I am. They just grew up with it, or they're naturally talented. It's a real talent. And,
it's hard, man. If you're not used to it, and it's a steep learning curve.
It is, and you can really. I've had 3 road racing accidents. And 3 pretty good crashes riding in the dirt. And I never got injured in the road racing accidents. I just low-sided and slid off the track in a big cloud of dust and, scuffed up my leathers.
Sure.
But every dirt bike crash I've had of any consequence, I've really gotten banged up. I've broken ribs and, I've lost 2 summers where I had to sit in, in a lazy boy chair taking Vicodin.
Just waiting to heal up.
Yeah, waiting to heal up. And so I finally realized I had a pretty good crash about 2 years ago in Big Bend Park in Texas and off-road. And I thought maybe it's time for me not to do this anymore. I only have so many summers left, and I don't really want to spend them sitting in a chair waiting for my ribs to heal.
Yeah, geez. I told you, we said it before, but you're a direct inspiration for doing Driven to Ride. I mean,
that's nice.
Being able to document experiences on motorcycles, and that kind of leads me to this question. Do you have any motorcycling heroes?
Oh, yeah, probably a lot, but I think the people that come to mind are probably the first road racing hero I had was Mike Halewood, and also John Surtees, because I grew up in the 60s when they were big. And Surtees, especially, he was the only person to be world road racing champion and Formula One champion. And I mean, he was just a great driver and a great rider.
That's impressive.
And he actually came to Elkhart Lake a few years ago. He was a guest for the historic races at Elkhart Lake.
Okay.
And Road and Track used to put on a dinner for people who, the guests of the track and so on. And so Barb and I got to sit at a table with John Surtees and his family. It was like a dream come true. And he was just the nicest guy on earth. And his family was nice. And he's very funny and down to earth. And he loves motorcycles. That's what I like. He's, he was in his probably late 70s then, and he's still restoring bikes and going on vintage bike rides. And you can tell he's just, he loves motorcycles. Yeah. And sadly, he his son was there, and his son was a go-kart champion in England.
Oh, cool.
And
Okay.
a few years later, his son was killed. I felt terrible. He was killed in a racing crash. And, it's a kind of a sad coda to that story. But anyway, for road racing, I was very interested in those guys. And then, of course, there's Malcolm Smith for off-road riding, who,
Sure.
won the Baja 1000 several times. And I got to meet him a couple of years ago at the Quail Lodge for the motorcycle gathering. And he was at a dinner that we all went to. And I got to talk to him for quite a while. And there's just never been anybody like Malcolm Smith. He's just an amazing rider and a really nice man.
Mm-hmm.
And met his wife too. And his wife is a pilot, and they have a place in Baja. And he's an aircraft mechanic, trained aircraft mechanic.
Okay.
So they fly down to Baja and land about halfway down at this village where they stay. And he's done a lot of fundraising for children, for schools and hospitals and so on for Baja. So he was in that era of dirt riders that I really admired. And Bill Baird was another hero of mine. He raced Triumph 500s. When I was in college and high school, I always wanted a Triumph T100C.
Yeah.
And high pipe Triumph, and he had an almost stock Triumph and just won the Jack Pine Enduro every year, and he'd win the championship. So there's Bill Baird and Steve McQueen. He was a good rider. I'm not sure that he was he was good enough to get in the ISDT team. Mm-hmm. And so he's a good rider. And I knew several people who went riding with him, and he did very well in desert races.
Sure.
But it wasn't his main focus. But I think he did a lot to inspire people my age. He was in the movies, The Great Escape, and everybody knew that he rode motorcycles. And so he added an element of interest and class, to motorcycling that made it especially attractive, I think, for people who were in high school when I was. And
king of cool, right?
Yeah, he was. He really was. And it goes on to this day. I mean, his motorcycles change hands for a lot of money and cars.
Yeah.
So,
and it seems like the people, from your stories and just from people that I've met through adventures, you can't really meet somebody who's a negative person, I guess, motorcycling.
Yeah.
I was perusing through Leanings 3 the other day, because that's the only book that I haven't finished of the collections of your collections of articles. And the line stuck out to me that you said motorcycling is a happy business. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
It's the people who do it love motorcycles, and they like motorcycles more than they like hurting other people. I think I wrote that column at a time after the Oklahoma City bombing.
Okay.
And I thought about, was it Timothy McVeigh who blew up? And, he's got all these conspiracy problems and theories, and wants to get even for this and that. And I said, I ride motorcycles with all kinds of people, and they enjoy life, and they would never consider doing something like that because they have a hobby. They have something to focus their minds on other than what's bothering them about other people. And everybody I know who is an avid motorcyclist is they're all just interesting, nice people generally. And you just don't run into, you don't run into that type of person who really loves motorcycles. It's a passion that is, it distracts you from the rest of the world or something, but I like it that way. So. Yeah,
I would agree. So, I think that's a great place to end. So thank you, Peter Egan, for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming up.
It's been amazing. So
thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Driven to Ride. Interact with us and check out full unedited conversations, photos, interviews, video interviews, plus other goodies on YouTube or Instagram at Driven to Ride Podcast. Or you can check us out at driventoridepodcast.com. And make sure you leave us a rating and review from wherever you get your podcasts too. If you have an idea for an episode or a guest, or you want to invite us out on an adventure, email us hello@driventoridepodcast.com. Driven to Ride is wholly owned by Flint Rock LLC, made possible with help from Matthew Miles, and written, hosted, and produced by me, Mark Long. We'll see you out there.